interested in fire, engaged with fire first shortly after I turned 18, and signed on as a smoke chaser at the North Rim of Grand Canyon. I returned for 15 seasons in all, and became a pyromantic, not a pyromaniac, important distinction. Well, on a fire crew, you quickly learn how fires shape a season, and how fire seasons can shape a life. And I wondered if the same might be true for humanity. After all, we are uniquely fire creatures on a uniquely fire planet. So eventually I traded in my Pulaski for a pencil, became a scholar on fire, and tonight I'll give you the short version of what I've learned. Well, among the ancient elements, fire is the odd man out. Earth, air, water, all are substances. But fire is a reaction. It synthesizes its surroundings. It takes its character from its context. So it may be nature's first experiment in postmodernism. But fire is a shapeshifter, and that has proved true intellectually as well. The other ancient elements all have academic disciplines devoted to their study, even whole departments. But the only fire department on a university campus is the one that sends emergency vehicles when an alarm sounds. I think the best way to think about fire is to realize that it's a product of the living world. Fire on Earth exists because of life on Earth. Life created the oxygen. Life created and rearranges, organizes the fuels. And as soon as life began colonizing the continents, it began to burn. And it's burned ever since. We have fossil charcoal that dates back 420 million years. You can find fire scars in trees in the petrified forest. But fire burn patchily. Different places, burn in different ways, different eras, burn in a different intensity. So as life changes, as the atmosphere changes, so fires change. So quickly, if we go back, we're starting to reconstruct some of the paleohistory of fire. First evidence of fire, as plants begin to diversify, oxygen is still relatively low, not so many fires, plants increase, oxygen increases, lots of fires, and then an overwhelming amount of fire. And that only ends with the extinction event, because the stuff that makes fire possible disappeared, so fire disappears with it, or changes its character. Or if we were to put a grand scroll across it, we'd see eras with high fires, eras with low fires. Current fire world has been whipsawed between fire and ice, glacial and interglacial, although there's plenty of evidence now that we are in a new era, even a geologically significant era, driven by ourselves, and I would argue, driven by our capacity over fire. So for most of history, natural history, fire in the form of fast combustion has competed with slow combustion, that is metabolism, respiration, decomposition in the organic world. They tend to compete. And when this is a very difficult problem to sort out. It's really fire ecology's three-body problem. There's no exact solution. Everything is always a little bit out of sync. But this has gone on for a long time. What underlies it is patterns of wetting and drying. It has to be wet enough to grow stuff, then dry enough to burn. So in Arizona, where I come from, if we have wet winters, the deserts burn. If we have dry winters, the mountains burn in the summer. Otherwise, you would depend on an ignition source, which is almost always lightning, overwhelmingly lightning, and that is pretty much a kind of lottery. Or it was, until a creature arrives who could wrest control away from lightning, in effect, seize control over ignition. This is a real phase change in the natural history of the planet. This is a real marker in human history as well, because people can now begin rearranging, redistributing, redefining the domain of fire, increasing it, in effect making a pact with fire that will expand fire's domain. At the same time, fire will empower humans in a huge way. We got small guts and big heads because we learned to cook food. We went to the top of the food chain because we learned to cook landscapes. And now we've become a geologic presence because we're cooking the planet. We have been for a long time, and increasingly, with increasing authority, been the keystone species for fire on the planet, directly and indirectly. You know, other creatures knock over trees and dig holes in the ground, hunt, eat plants. We do fire. Our environmental power, our ecological signature, and in many ways our environmental presence is really a firepower. And as we've learned to expand it, our own presence on the planet has increased. So fire has long been the focus of social life, the hearth, what could be long the definition of a family, those who shared a hearth. Around fires we worked, we made things, we played, we worshiped. Around fires we told the stories about who we were, who we are, how we've come to be. Focus, by the way, for the linguists in the crowd, focus is the Latin word for hearth. Literally the focus of human life. Fire was very likely our first domestication. Think about the terms, particularly in English, we use to describe how we tend, feed, care for, fire, the things you have to do. In effect, the domus was made to protect the fire more than the people. It's certainly a catalyst for technology, very little of technology, and the further back in time you go, the more powerful this is the case. It does not rely on fire somewhere as an all-purpose catalyst to speed up and make possible. We can transform mud into bricks, sand into glass, ore into metals. How much of our technology relies on fire? Our chemistry, even our philosophers, paradigm, through fire. Fire was the means that you transmuted things, made the dross world into a knowable world, and indeed a habitable world. And because of its presence, its ability to empower us, I think fire may very well also be our first Faustian bargain, something that we're still having to deal with. Well, fire tended to occupy two forms. One was a closed one in a built environment, in a domus, or some kind of forge or confined place, and then fire in the landscape. And for the most part, these two played equally out. But in time, the two will come to interact in curious ways. Aboriginal fire was a very powerful one. By Aboriginal fire, I mean that fire economy which is based on the ability to determine the place and time of ignition. It's very powerful in places that already have fire. You can take over that landscape very quickly by changing the timing of the fire, by preemptively burning, by altering the way it appears. But it's very difficult to introduce fire where the environment is not going to tolerate it. The power of landscape fire resides in the power to propagate. And that is not something under people's control, except to the extent that they can control where and when they burn. So if you want more power, you want to increase your ability to manipulate the world through fire, you're going to have to change that environment. So you're going to start slashing and drying. You're going to drain. You're going to introduce livestock and other ways to churn up the landscape, to put it into a form that will make it more amenable to burning, so that now you can begin burning where nature would never have burned. And you can begin burning in ways and times that wouldn't have been possible. But this too comes with limits. You know, it's limited by the ability of that particular ecosystem to grow fuels in a, quote, sustainable way. If you overdo it, the system begins winding down, or what Linnaeus and others call, leaves a world of rich parents and poor children. So if you want to increase your firepower, and it seems a large number of us always do, you'll have to find another source of things to burn. And we have an endless search around the countryside for stuff. So we can move our farms and pastures through forests, through the landscape, or we can rotate the landscape through a particular plot, but in some way or another, you're looking for fallow. You know, and European agronomists have always hated fallow. They've detested it for at least a couple thousand years. They've denounced it in literature. So waste. The waste of land that needs to be put into production, and worse, it's burned. You know, I think, well, maybe if you look at this as a fire historian and you realize that almost all agriculture outside of floodplains, where water can take the place of fire for fertilizing and fumigating, almost all those places need fire. Maybe they got it backwards. Maybe it's not burned to get rid of it. Maybe it's grown in order to be burned. Because at some point, you're going to need that ecological jolt, that kind of biotic defibrillation that fire provides. But nonetheless, you can run out. There are crazy stories. People even bring seaweed and drying it out to get more stuff to put on the landscape so they can get the proper fire. So eventually we turned to lithic landscapes. We found another source of things to burn. And we began burning them in different ways on a huge scale. This, again, is another phase change in the history of fire, and I think in the history of the planet. We began putting them into machines, burning them into various appliances, applying that firepower indirectly, but also multiplying it. So here's Matthew Bolton, James Watt's business partner, remarking, here's what we sell, sir. We sell what all the world desires to have, power. So as